Poor thing, such a tacky dress, sneered Vivian, her voice dripping with venom. Clara froze, wine staining her gown, as laughter rippled through the opulent Chicago penthouse at her second wedding anniversary. Humiliation burned her cheeks, orchestrated by Vivian, her husband Theo's glamorous ex. The crowd's eyes pierced her, but what unfolded next defied every expectation. Theo, the billionaire who'd swept Clara from her modest life, reacted in a way that turned shame into something extraordinary. What did he do to shift their world forever? Would Clara rise or crumble under the spotlight? Stay to the end. The twist will stun you. Will Vivian's cruelty triumph, or will truth reshape their story? Vote 1 if it grips you, 0 if it falls flat. Clara's reflection stared back from the floor-length mirror, a stranger draped in elegance she barely recognized. The off-the-shoulder evening gown clung to her frame, its heart-shaped neckline framing her collarbone with feminine grace. Tiered sheer sleeves cascaded like whispers of clouds, and the fitted waist gave way to a softly flowing skirt that shimmered under the penthouse's crystal chandelier. Tonight was their second wedding anniversary, a celebration in Chicago's most exclusive rooftop venue, perched high above the city's twinkling skyline. Yet as Clara smoothed the violet fabric, her stomach churned. This wasn't her world. She was a bookkeeper from Evanston, a woman of spreadsheets and quiet evenings, not caviar and couture. 2 years ago, she'd met Theo at a community finance workshop in a cramped library basement. Clara, with her earnest smile and knack for simplifying budgets, had been leading a session for low-income families. Theo, a real estate magnate whose name graced skyscrapers, had wandered in, curious about the crowd. He stayed for her talk, captivated not by her slides but by the fire in her voice, the way she made numbers feel like hope. They talked until midnight about dreams, about the novels she read in secret, about the city he wanted to reshape. When he proposed 6 months later, under the stars at Adler Planetarium, Clara said yes, believing love could bridge any divide. Now standing in their Lakeshore Drive penthouse, she wasn't so sure. Theo's world was a maze of polished smiles and veiled judgments. His family, old money Chicagoans, greeted her with polite nods but eyes that said she'd never belong. His friends, draped in designer labels, spoke of yacht parties and private islands, leaving Clara clutching her glass, searching for a way in. She'd tried. God, she'd tried. Studying art auctions, memorizing vineyard names, even buying this gown that cost more than her old car. But the whispers followed her. She's so ordinary, or Theo could have done better. Tonight, their anniversary party, was her chance to prove them wrong, to stand beside Theo as his equal, or so she hoped. The elevator chimed, signaling the first guests. Clara took a breath, her fingers grazing the gown's delicate sleeves. "You can do this," she whispered, but her reflection looked unconvinced. Downstairs, the rooftop venue glowed with opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Lake Michigan's inky expanse, reflecting chandeliers that dripped like frozen starlight. White orchids spilled from crystal vases, and a string quartet played softly, their notes weaving through the hum of arriving guests. Theo, dashing in a tailored black tuxedo, was already mingling, his laugh warm as he greeted colleagues. Clara watched him from the spiral staircase, her heart swelling. He made this world bearable. Then she saw her. Vivian, Theo's ex, glided through the crowd like a queen reclaiming her court. Her silver gown hugged every curve, catching the light with each step. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves, and her smile, sharp, knowing, cut through the room. Vivian was everything Clara wasn't. Born to wealth, educated at Ivy League schools, a socialite whose Instagram posts racked up thousands of likes. They dated for 3 years before Clara, and Vivian never let anyone forget it. At every event, her comments stung like paper cuts. "Oh, Clara, that's such a quaint dress," she'd say, or, "You're so refreshing, so unpolished." Each word was a reminder. Clara was an outsider. Tonight, Vivian's presence felt like a storm cloud. Clara descended the staircase, her gown whispering against the marble, and forced a smile as she greeted guests. "Lovely to see you," she said to a hedge fund manager, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. She moved through the crowd, offering champagne flutes, ensuring the hors d'oeuvres circulated. But she felt the eyes, judging, comparing. A woman in emeralds leaned to her husband, whispering, "She's trying so hard, isn't she?" Clara's smile faltered, but she pressed on, determined to play the perfect hostess. Vivian held court near the bar, surrounded by Theo's old college friends. Her laughter rang out, bright and practiced, as she recounted a story about a gala in Monaco. "Theo was there, of course," she said loudly, her eyes flicking to Clara. "We had the best time." The group chuckled, and Clara felt the jab, sharp and deliberate. She approached, hoping to join the conversation, but Vivian's smile widened, predatory. "Clara, there you are," she called, drawing every eye. "That gown is just adorable, so minimalist. Did you pick it from a thrift shop?" The words landed like a slap. Clara's cheeks burned, but she forced a laugh. "It's new, actually," she said softly. "I thought it suited the occasion." Vivian waved a manicured hand. "Of course, darling. It's so you." The group tittered, their laughter thin and cruel. Clara excused herself, her heart pounding, and slipped toward the catering station, pretending to check the trays. She was unraveling, the gown's elegance now a mockery. Theo was across the room, deep in conversation with a developer, oblivious to her struggle. She envied his ease, his belonging. As the night wore on, Clara retreated further, busying herself with small tasks, adjusting napkins, refilling ice buckets, anything to avoid the crowd's scrutiny. The quartet shifted to a slower melody, and the guests began to gather near the center table, where a towering ice sculpture gleamed. Theo had planned a toast, a moment to celebrate their 2 years of marriage. Clara's pulse quickened. This was her chance to stand beside him, to feel like his partner. She smoothed her gown, the sheer sleeves catching the light, and made her way to his side. But Vivienne was already there, her hand grazing Theo's arm, her smile too familiar. Clara's steps faltered. The crowd parted, and Theo caught her eye, his grin warm and grounding. "Ready, love?" he asked, extending a hand. She nodded, taking it, her fingers trembling. They stepped toward the microphone, the guests' eyes following. Clara felt the weight of their gazes, but with Theo beside her, she could face them, or so she thought. Vivian moved closer, a glass of red wine in her hand, her lips curved in a way that made Clara's skin prickle. "To the happy couple," Vivian said, raising her glass, her voice loud enough to draw attention. Then, as if by accident, she stumbled, the wine arcing through the air. It hit Clara's gown, a crimson stain blooming across the violet fabric, soaking the heart-shaped neckline and dripping down the flowing skirt. The crowd gasped, some stifling laughs, others whispering. Clara stood frozen, the world narrowing to the wet fabric clinging to her skin, and Vivian's mock-apologetic gasp. "Oh, Clara, I'm so clumsy," she said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Clara stood rooted to the spot, the cold sting of red wine seeping through her violet gown, a cruel tattoo across her chest. The heart-shaped neckline, once a symbol of her fragile confidence, now clung wetly to her skin, the crimson stain mocking her every attempt to belong. The rooftop's warm glow felt like a spotlight exposing her shame. Laughter, sharp and jagged, pierced the air. Some guests tried to mask it, but others didn't bother. Their eyes, glittering with judgment, pinned her in place. Vivian's voice, syrupy with false remorse, echoed in her ears. "Oh, Clara, I'm so clumsy." But the gleam in Vivian's hazel eyes betrayed her. Triumph, pure and unapologetic, as if she'd planned this moment to unravel Clara's carefully stitched facade. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat urging her to flee. She wanted to run, to vanish into the Chicago night, away from the chandeliers and the whispers that had haunted her for 2 years. Her fingers trembled, clutching the damp fabric of her skirt, the tiered sheer sleeves now heavy with wine. She could feel the weight of every glance. Theo's business partners, his childhood friends, his aunt with her diamond-encrusted clutch, all watching, waiting for her to crack. Clara's throat tightened, a sob threatening to break free, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't give Vivian the satisfaction. Not yet. Vivian stepped back, her silver gown shimmering as if untouched by the chaos she'd caused. "I'll grab a napkin," she said, her tone almost theatrical. drawing more eyes to Clara's ruin. A few guests murmured sympathies, but their words felt hollow, like coins tossed to a beggar. Clara's gaze darted to Theo, standing just a few feet away, his hands still outstretched from where they'd been about to speak. His face was unreadable, a mask of calm that twisted her stomach. Why wasn't he moving? Why wasn't he at her side, shielding her from this humiliation? The man who'd promised to love her through every storm stood frozen, and for a fleeting moment, Clara wondered if he, too, saw her as the outsider they all did. Her mind spiraled back to the early days of their marriage, when she'd first felt the chill of his world. At a charity gala, Vivian had cornered her by the dessert table, her smile ablaze. "You're so lucky Theo likes simplicity," she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. Clara had laughed it off then, clinging to Theo's love like a lifeline. But now, with wine soaking her gown and laughter ringing in her ears, that lifeline felt frayed. Had she been naive to think she could ever fit here? Her past, balancing ledgers for small businesses, reading dog-eared novels in her tiny apartment, seemed to mock her, whispering that she'd never be enough. A guest's phone flashed, capturing her disgrace, and Clara's chest tightened. She could already imagine the social media posts, Vivian's followers lapping up the drama. Her eyes stung, but she blinked fiercely, refusing to let tears fall. She wanted to scream, to call out Vivian's lie, but her voice felt trapped, smothered by the weight of the room. Instead, she forced herself to stand taller, the flowing skirt of her gown swaying slightly as she shifted. The stain was a wound, but she wouldn't let it bleed her dry. Not here, not now. Theo's silence stretched, unbearable. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Would he laugh it off, play the diplomat to keep the peace? Or worse, would he say nothing, letting her drown in this moment? She remembered their late-night talks, when he'd trace her palm and swear she was his anchor. "You're real, Clara," he'd said. "You're what keeps me grounded." But now, as Vivian's allies smirked and the crowd waited, Clara felt anything but grounded. She felt like a paper doll, torn and discarded in a world that glittered too brightly for her. A server, a young woman with kind eyes who'd once helped Clara at a charity event, approached hesitantly with a stack of napkins. "Here, ma'am," she whispered, her voice a small lifeline. Clara took them, her hands shaking as she dabbed at the stain, smearing it further. The gesture was futile, but it gave her something to do, a shield against the stares. She wanted to thank the server, to cling to that shred of kindness, but her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she offered a weak smile, her heart aching with gratitude and despair. Vivian hovered nearby, her apology forgotten as she chatted with a group of Theo's old friends, her laughter slicing through Clara's resolve. "Such a shame," Vivian said loudly. "That dress was almost chic." The words were a dagger, and Clara felt them twist. She glanced at Theo again, desperation clawing at her chest. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker. Anger, regret, or maybe resolve. But he didn't move, didn't rush to her side. Instead, he turned toward the microphone, his movements deliberate, almost too calm. Clara's breath caught. What was he doing? Was he about to make this worse? To let her humiliation stand as the night's centerpiece? Her mind flashed to the workshop where they'd met, when Theo had lingered after her talk, asking about her favorite book. She'd chosen The Great Gatsby, drawn to its tale of love in unreachable worlds. Now, standing in her ruined gown, she felt like Gatsby himself, chasing a dream that might destroy her. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Clara's pulse thundered. She wanted to believe in Theo, in the man who'd chosen her over this glittering abyss. But as he adjusted the microphone, his expression still unreadable, doubt gnawed at her. Would he stand by her, or would this moment break them apart? The server lingered, offering another napkin, her presence a quiet anchor. Clara clung to it, her fingers crumpling the cloth. She wouldn't run, not yet. Whatever Theo was about to do, she would face it, even if it shattered her heart. The room held its breath, and Clara braced herself, the wine-soaked gown a heavy reminder of her vulnerability. All she could do was wait. Clara's heart thudded, a caged bird battering against her ribs, as Theo adjusted the microphone. The wine-soaked gown clung to her like a second skin, its crimson stain a scarlet letter branding her as the outsider she'd always feared she was. The Chicago rooftop, with its glittering chandeliers and panoramic view of Lake Michigan, seemed to close in, the air thick with expectation. Every eye in the room, friends, colleagues, strangers, pinned her where she stood, the damp fabric of her violet dress heavy with Vivian's calculated cruelty. Clara's fingers tightened around the crumpled napkin from the kind-eyed server, her only tether to composure. She wanted to scream, to demand why Theo wasn't at her side, wiping away the wine and the shame. Instead, he stood at the microphone, his broad shoulders squared, his face a mask of calm that twisted her insides with dread. Was he going to ignore it? Brush off Vivian's act as a clumsy accident to save face for his glittering guests? Clara's mind churned, replaying the moment the wine had hit her, Vivian's mock apology ringing false. The laughter from the crowd, some stifled, some brazen, still echoed in her ears, each chuckle a needle pricking her fragile confidence. She'd spent 2 years trying to fit into Theo's world, memorizing the names of wines she couldn't afford, forcing smiles at galas where she felt like a prop. Now, standing in her ruined gown, the tiered sheer sleeves sagging with dampness, she felt like a fool for believing she could ever belong. Her chest ached, not just from humiliation, but from the fear that Theo, her anchor, might let her drift. Vivian lingered near the bar, her silver gown catching the light as she whispered to a cluster of Theo's old friends. Her lips curved in a half-smile, her eyes darting to Clara with the satisfaction of a predator savoring its kill. "Such a pity about that dress," she said, loud enough for Clara to hear, her voice laced with honeyed venom. "It was almost elegant." The words sliced through Clara, reigniting the sting of every barbed comment Vivian had ever made. "You're so authentic," she'd once said at a charity auction, the word dripping with condescension. Clara had clung to Theo's love then, believing it was enough, but now with his silence stretching, doubt clawed at her heart. Did he see her the way they did? A small-town bookkeeper who'd stumbled into a world too big for her? Her gaze flickered to the kind server, who hovered nearby, her eyes soft with concern. Clara wanted to thank her, to say something to anchor herself, but her throat was too tight, her voice lost in the storm of her emotions. Instead, she pressed the napkin to her chest, smearing the wine further, a futile act that mirrored her crumbling resolve. The crowd's murmurs grew, a low hum of anticipation. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, their sympathy fleeting, while others leaned forward, eager for the next act in this public drama. Clara's pulse raced, her breath shallow. She felt exposed, raw, as if the wine had stripped away not just her gown's beauty, but every layer of armor she'd built. Theo's hand rested on the microphone, his knuckles pale. Clara searched his face for a sign, anger, sorrow, anything, but his expression remained infuriatingly composed. She remembered their first date, when he'd driven her to a quiet diner outside the city, confessing he hated the pretension of his own world. "You're different, Clara," he'd said, his blue eyes earnest. "You make me feel like I'm enough, just as I am." Those words had carried her through every cold glance, every whispered judgment. But now, as he stood poised to speak, Clara feared they'd been a lie. What if he was ashamed of her too? What if this moment, with her dripping in wine and disgrace, was the final crack in their fragile bridge? A guest coughed, breaking the silence, and Clara's eyes stung with unshed tears. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of Vivian's triumphant smirk or the crowd's hungry stares. But the urge was overwhelming, a tidal wave threatening to pull her under. She thought of her old life, nights spent balancing budgets for struggling families, finding solace in novels where heroines triumphed. She'd never wanted this spotlight, this world of glittering facades. Yet here she was, its unwilling center, her heart laid bare. The kind server stepped closer, offering another napkin, her presence a quiet rebellion against the room's cruelty. Clara nodded, a silent thank you, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cloth. Vivian's laughter floated over again, sharp and deliberate. Maybe next time, Clara, stick to something. Washable, she said, her voice carrying to the edges of the room. A few guests snickered, and Clara's cheeks burned, the humiliation searing deeper. She wanted to retort, to call out Vivian's malice, but fear held her tongue. What if she made it worse? What if Theo, standing so still, agreed with them? Her mind flashed to their wedding day when he'd whispered, "You're my home," as they danced under a canopy of stars. Now that memory felt distant, fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it. Theo tapped the microphone, the sound cutting through the room like a gunshot. Clara's breath caught, her eyes locking on him. The crowd stilled, their whispers fading. Whatever he was about to say, it would define this moment, this night, perhaps their entire marriage. Clara's heart pounded, torn between hope and dread. Would he defend her, or would he let her fall? The napkin in her hand was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. She needed Theo, his love, his strength. As his lips parted, Clara braced herself, the weight of the room pressing down, her ruined gown a testament to her vulnerability. Clara's heart seized as Theo's voice cut through the silence, amplified by the microphone, steady yet edged with steel. The wine-stained gown clung to her, a cold, heavy reminder of Vivienne's cruelty, its once elegant violet fabric now a mockery of her fragile place in this glittering world. The Chicago rooftop chandeliers cast fractured light across her face, but Clara felt only the weight of every stare, some pitying, some amused, all suffocating. Her fingers crushed the napkin from the kind server, her lifeline in this sea of judgment. Theo's pause at the microphone had stretched her nerves to breaking, each second a blade twisting in her chest. Was he about to dismiss her humiliation, to laugh it off for the sake of his guests? Or would he finally see her, the woman drowning in shame before him? "Ladies and gentlemen," Theo began, his tone commanding, silencing the last whispers. Clara's breath hitched, her eyes locked on his, searching for the man who'd once called her his home. "I want to share a story about trust, love, and betrayal." His words hung heavy, and Clara's pulse surged, hope and dread warring within her. Vivienne, poised near the bar, froze, her silver gown no longer a beacon, but a spotlight on her unease. Her perfect smile faltered, and Clara caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. What was Theo doing? Clara's mind raced, replaying the sting of Vivienne's taunts, the wine's cold splash, the laughter that had flayed her pride. Could he know the truth behind it? Theo pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements deliberate. "For 2 years, someone has worked tirelessly to undermine my marriage," he said, his voice low but piercing. "Someone who thought lies could break what Clara and I built." Clara's heart lurched. He knew. Her thoughts spiraled to the late-night calls he dismissed as work, the tension in his jaw when Vivienne's name came up. Had he been hiding something? Theo connected his phone to the venue's sound system, and a recording crackled to life. Vivienne's voice, unmistakable, filled the room. "Clara's a nobody, Theo. She'll drag you down. Tonight I'll make sure everyone sees her for what she is, a cheap imitation." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Clara's knees weakened, shock and vindication flooding her. The recording continued, Vivienne's tone smug. "A little wine on that tacky dress, and she'll run crying. You'll see you belong with me." Clara's eyes stung, not from shame now, but from the raw truth of Vivienne's malice. The crowd turned, their gazes shifting from Clara to Vivienne, whose face had drained of color. "That's not—" Vivienne stammered, but Theo cut her off, his voice like ice. "You planned this," he said, pointing at her. "You thought you could humiliate my wife in our home, in front of our friends, to prove a point." Clara's chest tightened, a sob threatening to escape. He was defending her, but the pain of standing there exposed still burned. Theo's eyes found Clara's, and for the first time that night, she saw the man she'd married, fierce, unwavering. "Clara is the strongest person I know," he said, his voice softening but resonant. "She spent years helping families rebuild their lives, teaching them to dream through numbers. She loved me when my empire nearly crumbled, when everyone else walked away." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, blurring the room. She'd never told him how much those moments meant, how she'd stayed up nights helping him balance his books when investors fled. His words were a balm, soothing the raw edges of her humiliation. Vivian stepped forward, her voice shrill. "Theo, you're twisting this. I was trying to protect you." But the crowd's murmurs turned hostile, their sympathy shifting. Theo raised a hand, silencing her. "Protect me? By spreading lies? By calling my wife a gold digger to anyone who'd listen?" He gestured to the security guards at the room's edge. "Escort Ms. Harlow out. She's not welcome here." Clara's breath caught as Vivian's eyes widened, her composure shattering. The guards moved swiftly, and Vivian's protests, "This is a mistake," faded as she was led away, her silver gown trailing like a fallen star. Theo turned back to the crowd, his voice steady but laced with anger. "And to those of you who believed her lies, who whispered behind Clara's back, know this: you've shown your true colors." He pointed to a couple in the corner, old friends who'd laughed at Vivian's jabs. "The Warrens, the Lyles. Please follow Vivian out. I won't have anyone here who disrespects my wife." Clara's heart swelled, a mix of awe and relief washing over her. He was choosing her, publicly, unapologetically, over the world he'd always known. The room felt lighter, the air less oppressive as the named guests shuffled out, heads bowed. Clara stood still trembling, the wine-soaked gown a badge of survival now. Theo's words had cracked open the cage around her heart, but the sting of the night lingered. She wanted to run to him, to feel his arms around her, but her feet stayed rooted, her emotions a tangled storm. The kind server appeared again, offering a gentle smile, and Clara clung to that warmth, her anchor in the chaos. Theo's eyes met hers again, promising more than words could. But the night wasn't over. The crowd waited, and Clara braced herself for what came next. Clara's chest heaved, the wine-soaked gown a cold weight against her skin, but Theo's words still echoed, a lifeline pulling her from the abyss of shame. The Chicago rooftop, with its glittering chandeliers and starlit view of Lake Michigan, felt less like a cage now, the air softer after Vivian's departure and the exit of her allies. Clara's fingers, still clutching the crumpled napkin, trembled with a cocktail of relief and lingering hurt. Theo's defense had been a thunderclap, shattering the room's judgment, but the sting of humiliation lingered, raw and tender. Her eyes blurred with unshed tears, fixed on Theo as he stepped away from the microphone. His face no longer a mask, but alight with a fierce tenderness that made her heart ache. Had she ever doubted him? The question gnawed at her, guilt mingling with gratitude. Theo crossed the room, his strides purposeful, ignoring the murmurs of the remaining guests. Clara's breath caught as he reached her, his hands finding hers warm against her chilled fingers. "Clara," he said softly, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "I'm so sorry I didn't see this sooner." His blue eyes, usually so steady, shimmered with regret, and Clara felt a sob rise in her throat. She wanted to collapse into him, to let his arms erase the night's cruelty, but the eyes of the crowd still pressed against her, a reminder of her vulnerability. The violet gown, its heart-shaped neckline now marred by wine, clung to her like a confession of her fears. She wasn't enough, not for this world, not for him. Yet Theo's touch, firm and grounding, told a different story. "I should have protected you," he continued, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I let you face this alone, and I hate myself for it." Clara's heart twisted, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her doubt. She remembered the nights he'd come home exhausted, his empire teetering, and how she'd sat with him, balancing his books, offering quiet strength. He'd called her his rock, but standing here, dripping and exposed, she'd felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Now his words rebuilt her, brick by brick. "You're my everything," he said, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear, and Clara's cheeks warmed, not with shame, but with a fragile hope. The kind server, who'd lingered like a guardian angel, stepped forward with a shawl, her eyes soft with empathy. "For you, ma'am," she whispered, draping the soft fabric over Clara's shoulders. The gesture, small but profound, shielded her from the room's scrutiny, and Clara's lips trembled as she mouthed a thank you. The server's name tag read Lila, and Clara vowed to remember it, to hold on to this kindness amidst the chaos. The shawl, cream and delicate, covered the wine-stained gown, and for the first time that night, Clara felt a flicker of dignity return. She wasn't invisible, not to Lila, not to Theo. The crowd, now smaller, watched in hushed curiosity. Some, like Theo's business partner Marcus, nodded with respect, while others, neighbors who'd always been kind, offered tentative smiles. Clara's heart, bruised but beating, began to steady. Theo's hand tightened around hers, anchoring her to the moment. "I was blind," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought you were happy, that this world didn't touch you. But I should have seen the way they treated you. The way she treated you." His gaze flicked toward the door where Vivian had been escorted out, and Clara saw a flash of anger in his eyes, a fire that made her feel seen. She wanted to speak, to tell him she'd tried so hard to belong, to confess how Vivian's barbs had chipped away at her. But her throat was tight, her emotions a tangled storm of relief, love, and lingering fear. What if this was temporary? What if the next gala, the next party, brought another Vivian? Clara's fingers brushed the shawl, its softness a contrast to the damp gown beneath. "I didn't want to disappoint you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Theo's eyes widened, pain crossing his face. "Disappoint me?" he said, stepping closer, his voice fierce. "Clara, you're the reason I'm standing here. You loved me when I was failing, when I had nothing but debts and dreams." His words were a balm, soothing the raw wounds of the night. Clara's eyes stung, but she blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. The crowd's presence faded, the chandeliers and orchids blurring into the background. It was just her and Theo, his hands warm, his gaze unwavering. She remembered their wedding, when he danced with her in a quiet garden, whispering promises of forever. Those promises felt real again, solid beneath her feet. Lila, the server, lingered nearby, her presence a quiet reassurance, and Clara felt a surge of gratitude for these small acts of humanity that held her together. Theo turned slightly, addressing the room without letting go of her hand. "This night was meant to celebrate us," he said, his voice steady but warm. "And it still will, because Clara's worth celebrating." A few guests clapped, tentative at first, then stronger, led by Marcus and a neighbor, Sarah, who'd always asked about Clara's charity work. The applause was a lifeline, pulling Clara from the edge of despair. She squeezed Theo's hand, her heart swelling with a love that felt stronger for having been tested. The night wasn't over, but for now she wasn't alone. Clara's heart pulsed with the clink of glasses, the toast led by Marcus still ringing in her ears, a fragile melody of acceptance that wove through the Chicago rooftops' softened glow. The wine-soaked violet gown, hidden beneath Lila's cream shawl, no longer felt like a chain, but a quiet reminder of the battle she'd endured. The chandeliers above shimmered, casting flecks of light across her face, and the Lake Michigan skyline seemed to whisper that she could belong here, after all. Yet beneath the applause, Clara's emotions churned, a heady mix of relief, gratitude, and a lingering fear that this newfound warmth might slip away. Theo's hand, warm and steady in hers, anchored her, but her heart still trembled, afraid to fully trust the tide's turn. Could she truly step out of the shadow of this night? Theo's eyes, blue and unwavering, held hers with a love that felt like salvation. "You're incredible," he murmured, his voice a private haven amidst the crowd's hum. Clara's throat tightened, the weight of his words lifting the last shards of her humiliation. She wanted to believe him, to let his love erase the echoes of Vivian's venom, but the memory of the wine's cold splash still prickled her skin. Her fingers brushed the shawl, its softness a gift from Lila, the server whose quiet kindness had been her lifeline. Clara's gaze flickered to Lila, now clearing a tray nearby, her smile a beacon of sincerity. "I owe you," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. But Lila's nod carried a warmth that steadied her. The guests, fewer now but kinder, began to gather closer, their conversations shedding the polished veneer of earlier. Sarah, the neighbor who'd offered regret, approached with a glass of sparkling water. "Clara, I feel awful for not speaking up sooner," she said, her eyes earnest. You've always been so genuine. I should have seen through Vivian's act. The confession stirred something in Clara. Validation, yes, but also a pang of sadness for the years she'd spent hiding her true self to fit in. She'd pored over etiquette books, practiced small talk, all to avoid nights like this. Now, standing in her stained gown, she felt a flicker of pride in the woman she'd been all along. "Thank you, Sarah," Clara said, her voice steadier than she expected. The words felt like a small rebellion, a reclaiming of her voice. She glanced at Theo, whose smile softened the hard edges of her fear. He squeezed her hand, his touch a promise that this moment wasn't fleeting. "Let's make this night ours," he said, his voice low but vibrant with resolve. Clara nodded, her heart lifting, though doubt still lingered like a shadow. Could she trust this shift, this sudden acceptance from a crowd that had once judged her? Her mind flashed to her old life, balancing ledgers, finding joy in helping others, and she realized that woman was still here, stronger than she'd known. Marcus, Theo's business partner, clapped his hands, drawing the room's attention. "Let's have some music," he called, signaling the string quartet. The notes shifted to a lively waltz, and guests began to sway, their laughter genuine now, free of the earlier cruelty. Clara's chest loosened, the music a thread pulling her toward hope. A woman in her 60s, a friend of Theo's late mother, approached, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "You remind me of myself," she said, her voice soft. "I was never one of them either, but I learned to shine in my own way." Clara's eyes stung, the words a mirror reflecting her buried strength. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Theo leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Dance with me?" he asked, his voice a gentle plea. Clara hesitated, the weight of the night still heavy, but his eyes held no judgment, only love. She nodded, letting him lead her to the center of the room. The shawl slipped slightly, revealing the stained gown, but Clara didn't flinch. Let them see. She was done hiding. As they moved to the music, Theo's hand firm at her waist, Clara felt the crowd's eyes soften, their warmth a quiet apology. Lila watched from the sidelines, her smile radiant, and Clara's heart swelled with gratitude for these small, fierce allies. "I was so afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above the music. "Afraid you'd see me the way they did." Theo's grip tightened, his eyes fierce. "Never," he said. "You're my heart, Clara. I should have shown you that every day." His words cracked something open in her, a flood of love and forgiveness. For him, for herself. She'd spent so long trying to be what she thought he needed, but now, swaying in his arms, she saw the truth. He'd chosen her for who she was, stains and all. The dance floor filled, guests joining them, their movements a celebration of something real. Clara's heart, bruised but unbroken, began to heal. The night had been a crucible, but it had forged a new strength within her. She wasn't whole, not yet, but she was enough. As the music soared, she leaned into Theo, her anchor, and let herself believe in the dawn. Clara swayed in Theo's arms, the waltz's gentle rhythm a heartbeat syncing with her own, as the Chicago rooftops' chandeliers cast golden flecks across her shawl-draped shoulders. The wine-stained violet gown beneath, once a symbol of her shame, now felt like a quiet victory, a testament to the resilience she'd unearthed. The Lake Michigan skyline glimmered beyond, a silent witness to her transformation. Her heart, still tender from Vivian's cruelty, pulsed with a newfound clarity. She was enough, had always been enough. Yet as the music wove through the laughter of the remaining guests, Clara's emotions churned, a delicate dance of triumph and vulnerability. Theo's touch grounded her, but the night's scars lingered, whispering questions. Could she carry this strength forward? Would she ever truly belong? Theo's hand rested steady at her waist, his eyes searching hers with a love that felt like absolution. "You're glowing," he murmured, his voice a soft anchor in the swirl of sound. Clara's lips trembled, a smile breaking through her doubts. The words stirred memories of their first dance under a starlit garden, when she'd felt invincible in his love. Now that invincibility flickered again, fragile but growing. The shawl, Lila's gift, brushed her skin, a reminder of the kindness that had held her together. She glanced at Lila, now serving drinks with a quiet grace, and felt a surge of gratitude. This woman, a stranger turned ally, had seen her when she felt invisible. The guests, their faces softened by the night's shift, mingled with a warmth Clara hadn't expected. Marcus, Theo's business partner, laughed with a group nearby, his earlier toast still echoing in her mind. Sarah, the neighbor, approached, her eyes bright with sincerity. "Clara, you've made this night unforgettable," she said, her voice warm. "I'm so glad you're here." The words pierced Clara, not with pain but with a healing warmth. She'd spent so long chasing approval, molding herself to fit a world that glittered too brightly. Now, standing in her stained gown, she felt a spark of pride, not for fitting in, but for standing out, flaws and all. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice steady, a quiet rebellion against her earlier silence. She meant it, for Sarah, for Lila, for every soul who'd stayed. Her heart swelled, the weight of the night's humiliation lifting, though not gone. The memory of Vivian's smirk, the wine's cold splash, the crowd's laughter still stung, like a bruise pressed too hard. But Theo's stand, his fierce defense, had shifted something deep within her. She wasn't the bookkeeper hiding behind a borrowed gown. She was Clara, the woman who'd balanced Theo's dreams when his world crumbled, who'd loved him through chaos. That truth, raw and radiant, burned brighter than her doubts. Theo slowed their dance, his gaze intense. "I almost lost you tonight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not to Vivian, but to my own blindness." Clara's chest tightened, the honesty in his words unraveling her last defenses. She'd feared he'd see her as the crowd did, a misfit, a mistake. But his eyes told a different story, one of love and regret. "You didn't lose me," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "You reminded me who I am." The admission felt like a release, a shedding of the fear that had chained her for years. Lila approached with a tray of sparkling water, her smile a quiet encouragement. "You're doing great," she whispered, and Clara's eyes stung with gratitude. She wanted to hug Lila, to thank her for being a lighthouse in her storm, but she settled for a nod, her heart too full for words. The music shifted, lighter now, and guests began to share stories, real ones about family, dreams, not the polished anecdotes of wealth. Clara listened, her shawl slipping slightly, revealing the stained gown. She didn't flinch. Let them see her scars. They were hers, earned and owned. Marcus raised another glass, his voice booming. "To love that fights back." The crowd cheered, their glasses glinting, and Clara's heart lifted, the sound a chorus of acceptance. She leaned into Theo, her cheek against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice muffled. "Scared I'd never be enough for you." Theo's arms tightened, his voice fierce. "You're more than enough. You're my everything." His words were a vow, sealing the cracks the night had left. As the quartet played on, Clara felt a shift, a quiet certainty settling in her bones. She'd come to this night seeking to prove herself, to wear a gown that screamed she belonged. But she'd learned something greater. Belonging wasn't about fitting their mold, it was about standing tall in her own. The guests' warmth, Leela's kindness, Theo's love, they were her truth now. The wine stain, the laughter, Vivian's malice. They'd tested her, but they hadn't broken her. She was Clara, and that was enough. The night spun on, the rooftop alive with laughter and music, and Clara stood at its heart, no longer an outsider. Her hand in Theo's, she felt the dawn of something new, not just love, but a belief in herself that no one could take away. Clara's night of trial, stained by wine but redeemed by love, left the Chicago rooftop forever changed. Her journey from shame to strength, sparked by Theo's unwavering stand, speaks to the heart of resilience. What did you feel as Clara faced Vivian's cruelty? Did Theo's defense stir your hope, or did Lila's quiet kindness steal your heart? Share your thoughts. Your voice matters in this story's echo. Thank you for joining Clara's fight, for standing with her through the storm. Her triumph reminds us all. You are enough, just as you are. Come back for more tales of courage and love that defy the odds. Until then, Hold your truth close and let it shine. Vote 1 if it moved you, 0 if it missed.